minute or so, and then we'll kick it off. Okay, well, it's just a little bit after 2:30. We have about 70 people who've joined. So, yeah, I'll kick it off. So, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Martin Matica. I'm the Group Manager for WO Operations, located in WA. And this afternoon session is like a special WA ECF, and we're just going to cover the summer readiness activities in the upcoming hot season as well. So thank you very much for joining. Just move to the next slide. So we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, seas and waters across Australia. We honour the wisdom of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island elders past, present and embrace future generations. We acknowledge that whenever we work, we do so on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island land, and we pay respect to the world's oldest continuing culture and First Nations people of deep and continued connection to country, and hope our work can benefit both people and country. Okay, so today's agenda, this should have actually been sent out, but as a recap, we're going to be giving the summer outlook for the Southwest Interconnected System and the associated readiness that we're doing in the wholesale electricity market. I'm actually going to be welcoming Nicola Falcon, who's our Interim Executive General Manager. We have Weather Zone joining us this afternoon, and Jess will give us an overview of the outlook for the summer period in terms of weather. And then it'll be back to me, and I'll give an update on market readiness. And there'll be plenty of time for Q&A. But if you do have an urgent question, just drop it in the chat, and we'll see how we go. Just in terms of sort of meeting hygiene, basically it's the standard process that we always run, which is a Q&A. Look, as I said, quite welcome if you put your hand up if there's something very urgent, and we'll see if we can jump in and answer it straight away. We'll be dropping a copy of this presentation onto our website after the meeting, and we'll send out a link as well. And you're also welcome to send us any email feedback after the presentation. Also note that we're going to be recording this presentation for those people who couldn't attend. So with that, I'll pass across to Nicola for a quick introduction. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Martin. I'm just doing a bit of a sound check. You can hear me okay? Excellent. And for those of you that I haven't had a chance to meet yet, I'm Nicola Falcon. I'm the EGM of Western Australia in an interim capacity. I'm just going in the next few minutes to talk you through a little bit of a recap on last summer. Now, I'm sure that many of you on the call don't need to be reminded of last summer. It's still probably etched well and truly on your minds, but for those of you that maybe were not so close to it, then this could be an interesting sort of situation assessment as we think about this summer coming. So it was a record-setting summer. We had average operational demand breaking several records in consecutive days. We had a peak demand of 4,233 megawatts, which was recorded at 10 to 6 on the 18th of February. Something I still find fascinating is this was actually a Sunday, which is not normally the day of the week that we would expect to see a demand temperature record or a demand record. We did require some action to be taken to manage the lack of reserve conditions, and that did result in lower demand. Jumping through it a little bit more. It resulted in lower demand than would otherwise have been observed. But you can see on this chart that you'd have to go back sort of 7 years. First record back in 2016, and then we had a 7-year gap before we got a record of over 4,000 megawatts again in 2023. But then with this last summer, we well and truly exceeded them on both the 18th, 19th and 20th of February. So quite remarkable, really, given that the 10 years prior to that. I think I can move forward this slide. Let me see if that works. Otherwise, I might have to get you, Martin, to keep control of it. If you can step forward, please. So this is just spotlighting on those 3 days, the 18th, 19th and 20th of February. So the operational demand records we're talking about are obviously the net of a rooftop PV. You can see the highest record on the Sunday at the left of this chart. Another thing I find interesting is the third highest record was then the Monday, the 19th. That actually had significant underlying demand of 5 gigawatts. And we'll talk about it in the next slide, but really you can see how that was driven by heatwave conditions that were extending and very, very high minimum temperatures overnight. So the extended heat wave, we had temperatures exceeding 40 degrees on a number of days, minimum overnights of 27 degrees, so pretty hot and difficult for people to cool down at any time, meaning air conditioners were running hot. We did issue LOR2 declarations for the peak period and issued an LOR3 declaration on the 19th due to the high demand and also low wind. The record was set, as I've already mentioned, at 5 minutes to 6 on the 18th, and that was just as the PV is starting to reduce with sunsetting, and you can see that quite clearly in the chart as well. And we were needing to use diesel generation to manage the peak demand on each of those days. We also really valued the contribution from demand-side participation, from the supplementary capacity, and then the other provisions that were also activated, which meant that we were able to effectively get an additional 235 megawatts into the system that we would otherwise not be able to do. So pretty tight, and on consecutive days, which certainly made for quite an interesting time in the control room. Just spotlight once more on what were some of those what some of the weather conditions driving that. If we just flick to the next slide, please, Martin. This helps explain things a little bit as to what was really driving the demand and the tight conditions. So if you look at that temperature, I won't expect you to look through all of the chart at the moment, but I think the thing that sort of comes to my mind quite quickly is the overnight temperature on that Sunday that didn't go below 27 degrees. And that just meant that we have what we sort of call heat banking in the households. We don't get a chance to cool down, and it ends up exacerbating the demand for the following day. So that really was what was contributing to the very high, large unscheduled demand. And then even with the contribution from PV, we still had the third highest operational demand on the system in that day. So I think at that I'm going to sort of hand back now to Martin, who will then start looking at what the temperatures might be for the year ahead. Oh, I've got one more slide. Apologies. I've got the wind forecast. So the other thing that was really interesting on that day, and it is still relevant for the weather forecasts, one thing is the temperature. The other thing is what contribution we might get from wind. And, when we see that we have got tight conditions ahead, we do tend to take a conservative approach in terms of what we think our wind forecast availability will be. And there's a good reason for that, as you can see in these slides. The forecast for that Monday the 19th, this was Monday the 19th of January, the forecast on 19th of January was quite a lot higher than what we actually experienced. And given that there's that much uncertainty in those wind forecasts, it's prudent of us to have that conservative approach to make sure that we do have enough supply to cover those peak demand conditions. So now I will hand back to Martin, and I think he's going to hand straight over to Jess to talk about what we might see as the weather conditions in this coming summer. Thank you.
I will. I'll just do a quick staging before I hand over to Jess. So when we go into any seasonal outlook, we actually have quite a set process in how we manage the risk and assess if anything's actually changed between the last period and next. And we also do a bottom up approach also from a forecasting point of view. So when we look at the summer outlook, we look at quite a number of themes to help us assess the risk on the power system that we're looking forward. For those who haven't seen this graph, there is a bit of colour, don't get too alarmed. We have sort of like a lightish purple when conditions improved, a very lighter purple, I think, or a pinkish for when they're unchanged, or if things get worse, it's quite dark. So in terms of looking forward, that's absolutely correct. We'll have more of a deep dive into the weather outlook, is that the similar or unchanged conditions for heat waves, that's actually across the whole of the continent, but particularly in WA. And also we believe the bushfire risk is unchanged, which it effectively is its extreme fire danger throughout the hot period. And also the risk of flooding is also remained unchanged, which is relatively low. We are looking at potential record maxes over the period, and that's like a potential to get worse as such. And also, but the good news is from available generation, it's effectively unchanged as well. We'll go into a lot more detail later on in the presentation in relation to those aspects, as well as generation availability. Network outages and availability remains unchanged, as so does the reliability going forward, certainly after we've went out for the ESU and issued out supplementary reserve capacity. In terms of fuel supply, we've got actually very strong coal stockpiles for the thermal generators, and we actually have sufficient gas and storage as well. And the health of the market we measure by potential security, that's actually maintained week on, week out, and there's no change in the risk profile for that. So more of a staging for the rest of the presentation to come. And with that, I will now hand over to Vanessa for Jess to give us an update from that. So over to yourself. Hope you can take control. Great. I'll go off camera and I'll let you take it.
Good afternoon. Hopefully you can see that screen. Let me know.
We can.
Let me know if you can't. So yeah, we'll have a bit of a closer look at the rest of spring and the summer outlook in as much as we can. It's a pretty annoyingly neutral outlook this summer at the moment. Just to start, we have recently had a name or a brand change, which you may have heard about. We've adopted the name of our parent company, DTN APAC, but our products are still known as Weather Zone. So anyone has any questions about that, just reach out to Ash or Joel or whoever you normally interact with. So going into looking at what might happen this summer in terms of particularly temperature and rainfall, I'm just going to look at the state of the climate relatively briefly, and then we'll have a bit of a look at the outlooks. So for the last couple of months, the temperatures in the Pacific have continued to show a La Nina-like pattern with cooling in the Central Pacific, though it's relatively weak. It hasn't met thresholds for a La Nina to be declared. We are on La Nina watch, according to the Bureau. So there's the potential that a weak La Nina could develop over summer into autumn, but only one or two forecast models are indicating that. So most likely to be relatively neutral or a weak La Nina pattern going through the summer. And that's what I just mentioned there. The thing to note with these, particularly the tropical Pacific, so La Nina, El Nino, and so in general, is they are teleconnection patterns and statistics that have been developed relative to the long-term climate, and we are looking at an overall heating across the ocean basin. So we are starting there is this new index called the Relative Nino Index, which does take into account that background heating, and when you look at that, it is even lower than the already relatively low Nino index. So that's worth noting as well. When we do have a La Nina pattern, as you possibly know, we have pretty strong impacts over the eastern Australia, less so over southwest Australia. We can see warmer than average temperatures, but yeah, little, not a massive impact on rainfall, and it's obviously a relatively low rainfall time of year anyway. Another climate driver is the Indian Ocean dipole. It's been pretty negative. There's some very warm sea surface temperatures off the northwest of WA. That is leading, as we can see this week, to some increasing moisture input over western WA and right down to the east, rather. And that is going to continue, but these events tend to decay once the monsoon starts in summer, and that is predicted to start relatively soon, probably during December. So that impact will also ease off during the summer, and I'll reference that again a bit more later. And another climate mode is the southern annular mode, which has been relatively positive, and we are expecting it to stay that way. Now, that tends to, not that we get major cold fronts usually at this time of year, but it does keep them further south. It does tend to lead to more easterly events, which of course can bring significant heat to southwest WA. So that's what I just said there. The other thing of note that is helping drive climate around and weather around southwest WA at the moment are sea surface temperatures. There's very warm anomalies off the northwest, and they are, in all models you look at, predicted to continue at similar values throughout the summer. So that's the summary of the climate drivers. And of course, the more interesting thing is, what do they mean? So in terms of rainfall outlooks, it's an annoyingly, unclear forecast. So if we look at this is the mean rainfall anomalies predicted by an EC product. So the resolution here is 10 millimetres. So you can see a fair bit of blue over western WA, particularly in the early part of summer, and it tends to ease off certainly by January, and then we've got some positive anomalies again in February and March. But if you look at the chance of exceeding the median rainfall from December 24 to February 25 from the Bureau, which is a categorical, which is a statistical forecast instead of like this one, which is a categorical forecast, you see that the chance of exceeding the median rainfall is actually slightly less than the 50%. So what's going on? Well, there's a couple of things. One is that the resolution here is not great. So the average rainfall, monthly rainfall over much of southwest WA at this time of year is only in the 10 to 20 millimetre range. So a lot of variability is going to be hidden within that single colour there, and it's not going to take much of a shift in a category here to change it over here. In the statistical compared to just the median forecast. And the other thing that's going on is there is a bit of variability throughout the summer season. So as I mentioned earlier, with the negative trending Indian Ocean dipole, we are seeing a fair bit of moisture injection coming across Western Australia. We are also looking at the beginning of the monsoon and an active pulse of that during December. And so expecting potential above average rainfall, particularly over eastern parts or inland parts of WA at the beginning of summer, and then tending drier in the latter parts of summer. If you look at the Bureau chart broken down over the months, it does have some greater than median chances early in the summer, and then they are being pushed back over the whole summer by a drier January and also potentially February. So that's what's going on there. There's a bit of variation across the season. In terms of temperatures, those very warm sea surface temperatures and also the moisture injection leading to forecasts for well above minimum temperature forecasts, particularly again for inland parts where the moisture is more unusual, and you can see the strongest signal in November. We are looking at a wet couple of weeks. With the maximum temperatures, again, there's a bit of variation. We can see a lot of, generally across the continent, we're looking at above average or above median, rather, for most, or at least across most of the country for most of the summer. And when we look at the breakdown, we can see a lot of blue over WA in December. That will be associated with that predicted increase in rainfall. But do note that over the most populated areas, we're still looking at above average forecasts. This is compared to the long-term average, though, and as has already been noted in this meeting, last summer was extremely hot and dry. So it's not looking as hot, and it's certainly not looking as dry compared to last year. And just following on from that, talking about the major cooling and, well, the strongest cooler and wet signals in late November and early December are actually inland rather than on the coast. So for Perth, this is this black line, forecast maximum temperatures and minimum temperatures through till autumn next year. And the green line is the average. So you can see we are still forecasting temperatures a degree or two above average, both minima and maxima, throughout the summer, or at times during the summer, strongest, interestingly, in December and also in January. So in terms of extreme forecasts, again, looking above the long-term average of 27 extreme days, which we categorise as above 35 degrees, but unlikely to be as many as last year. By this time last year, Perth Airport had already had 5 days over 35, I think, and even Perth had had 1 or 2, whereas this year, I think the airport may have had 2, and I don't think, and Perth itself has possibly only had 1. So we're not seeing those early season really hot easterly wind events, and any easterly wind event that does come in the next few weeks, and at least through the first half of December, is more likely to be relatively humid and has some cloud associated with it. So not looking at quite those primed heatwave conditions, though, as I mentioned earlier, they will become more likely once we move into the new year, and that Indian Ocean dipole effect is mitigated, and we possibly also just see if that La Nina develops, we might just see that tends to enhance heat waves slightly over the southwest as well. So conscious that I don't want to talk for too long, but we've also have the dew point anomalies. So here you can see that quite strong humidity signal, and this scale is actually bigger than the previous temperature scales as well, in half-degree increments rather than 0.25-degree increments. So you can see that strong humidity signal, particularly over the inland in November and December. And here are the forecast mean surface sea surface temperature anomalies that I was talking about. So that's certainly helping drive those high minimum temperatures. This is just a forecast for cloudiness, sunshine anomalies, which fits with what we're saying. I was saying higher cloudiness early in the season and becoming less so later. I just wanted to quickly show the wind gust anomalies. This signal is pretty weak, which is frustrating. But what you can see is that we are looking at negative, so slower anomalies over the southeast of the country and slightly positive anomalies over the west of the country. And that's relatively typical for La Nina events. We tend to get a lot of easterlies over the east and they're not as strong as the westerlies. And over in the southwest here, this probably is to do with some fairly gusty easterlies coming in at times. But as you note, the anomalies are not particularly positive next year, which is when we are forecasting it to be hotter and drier. So that is relatively good news, because the highest positive wind signals currently coincide with the more humid and less hot temperatures. Just quickly, in terms of soil moisture, it was pretty dry earlier in the year, but we have had some rainfall recently, and so the rainfall deficiencies over the last 8 months are not as bad as they were, and you can see that in this soil moisture map, which was just an instantaneous map from a few days ago. So it's slightly below average in places down in the southwest corner, but not massively so. And that's reflected in the seasonal bushfire outlook, which does not have an significant increased risk of fire over the southwest region. Ash wanted to briefly talk about cyclones. So with those high sea surface temperatures, we could see slightly above, or the forecast is for slightly above normal numbers of cyclones developing over the western region. They can have a mixed effect, because if they inject the cloud right over the region of interest, so southwest WA, you might get a heap of rain and it might keep temperatures low. But if they don't inject a whole lot of cloud, then all that air that's going up in the cyclone has to come down somewhere, and the air warms as it comes down, so they can actually trigger heat waves. So in terms of relating that back to temperature and rainfall, it's really a case-by-case basis, and frustratingly, I can't tell you much about what they might do. So that's the summary. We're looking in overall for maximum and minimum temperatures to be above average for most areas for most of the season, with an above average chance of extreme heat. But the exception is in November and also parts of December. Heat waves are higher than average risk compared to the long-term average, but not looking as hot, and the risk not looking as high as last year. Rainfall, again, looking at above average rain in the north. There's a less clear signal in the southwest, but there is a relatively clear signal for increased rainfall for November and December, and then it's looking drier later in the season. And yes, like I just covered, the wind events slightly above average, particularly earlier in the season when it's more humid. I think that pretty much sums up all I have for you.
Great. That was that was fascinating. Thank you very much for that. Before we move on to the next part of the presentation, has anybody got any questions from Jess? Happy if you want to raise the hand or jump in. Either way is fine. All right. Looks like no questions for you yet. Anyway, if there is any, we'll get them and we'll send them on to you. But thank you very much for that presentation.
No worries.
Okay, Christine, if we can jump back to the default presentation, that'd be fantastic. Okay. Let's see if I've got control. Sorry, okay. I just recently control the presentation back. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, just moving on to the next bit. There is some slides in the pack which was sent out, which actually has some summary outlook. We're really including it for completeness, but it's also to give everybody indication. We do use multiple weather feeds when we look at the forecast system demand is, certainly in the 7-day outlook, and that gives us a greater confidence on what we think the demand spread is going to be. Okay, so looking forward to summer. So there's been a few changes. So as I mentioned before, we're quite comfortable with the level of stockpiles. Now, there is actually additional generation or additional capacity in the system compared to last year, and that mainly comprises of batteries or BESS, which is actually quite comforting. And for those who've attended our other forums, we also have access to Muja 6, which is actually operating what's called in reserve outage mode. And I'll go into a little bit more detail in how that works in relation to the mechanics over the hot season as well. The batteries that I mentioned actually will give us 425 megawatts of additional capacity. In terms of network outages, we classify these as high impact outages. So those are the ones that we really have to worry about energy flows in the power system or potentially constraints that we need to put on. The majority of those will be completed in mid-December. So there has been a considerable amount of work undertaken by Western Power over the last couple of months to connect out new generators and to do maintenance going into the summer period. In terms of, before I go into what we think the demand is, a bit of a recap where we've been in the past. So our record operational maximum demand's been 4,233, as Nicola mentioned, and we've also had some recent record minimum demands from an operational point of view, which is 511, which was only just on the weekend. Now, the way we calculate this is we look at possible maximum demand levels based on a probability of exceedance of 10%. So that's effectively a 1 in 10 year maximum level. And this is combined with, so we have to manage the risk associated with low variable energy, which is really associated to that sample day in January with the wind where, although the initial forecast may be quite high, the actual day will end up being low. So when we do forecast out and we consider what we need for the power system, we tend to take a fairly conservative view on what will be available for those periods. Now, in relation to the minimum demand threshold, it may seem odd to some people that we're actually raising this, but we've actually had instances between Christmas and New Year, we've had very mild days, and we managed to actually reach unexpectedly low demands. I think there was a Boxing Day, which we even might have had a record at that time. So it is something that is there as a risk and something that we watch quite closely as well. So it is technically quite a busy season from an operationals point of view. From an overall trends point of view, the underlying demand has been steadily growing, and we've also had increased volumes of distributed rooftop PV, and that's certainly actually hitting some new records in the amount of rooftop PV that's generation that's been assisting underlying demand management. Now, there's a lot of purple in this graph, so I'll just walk people through probably the more interesting parts of it, or the bits that you need to know. So the green line at the top is effectively the theoretical maximum amount of capacity that we have access in the power system. So this is what EMO can control, and that's a very important benchmark. It doesn't include generation that might be used as backup generators for, say, data centers, for example, unless they're part of the actual market. So just be aware of that. The dark line at the bottom, which I've just got my cursor against, is what we call the load forecast, and that's what we term as the high load forecast. So we manage when the power system this far out, we manage on basically the that high load forecast because it's potentially could happen any time in that period and gets finessed as you get closer to the time period. The next line, effectively here, which is the next purple line, is what we call the load forecast plus planning margins. So the planning margins allow us to handle unexpected disruption on the power system. So there is a margin that's associated to there, which makes sure that you know, we can, that has that contingency level. The variations in here, effectively over here, that is Christmas to New Year. We expect that a lot of industry will be shutting down. And then you have the normal cadence of lower demand over the weekend periods. The pink line here is actually what's available generation. So there is actually a number of generators that are currently on outage. They're coming off outage at the beginning of the period. And there's a few generators who are long-term outages, which means that pink line is slightly under the green line there. There is a couple of gaps here where they cross over, and that's associated where we have potential for LOR1 events. Now, these graphs include MUJA 6 in terms of operating as outage mode, but they do not include facilities that are under that are likely to be commissioned in December or January, and they also don't include the capacity that we're procuring under the reserve capacity mechanism or supplementary reserve capacity process that's almost completed. So although we do see a little bit of crossover, it's not a reason to be concerned at this point. A little bit more detail about what's coming down the line. So last year we had just a tad under 6,000 megawatts available. We can see Flat Rocks and Collie have come in, and now we're sitting at 6,183. And we have 2 other facilities that are under commissioning, which will give us that additional headroom. Okay, MUJA 6, I know this has been covered in multiple RIFs and also WAECFs, but it is actually a major component of our planning going into the hot season. So as a recap, it is a rather old generation facility. It was actually commissioned in 1971, courtesy that picture below from Synergy, so thanks for providing that. What's in place is there's a protocol between EMO and Synergy in relation to how the running of that facility will work, and actually how do we practically operate in reserve outage mode. So at a high level, we activate MUJA 6 if we can see LOR conditions in the forecast. And this may be forecasts or actual shortfalls. We may actually have to trigger it in case there's some unexpected outages, and it needs to fill the gap as well. And the other aspect, if we're forecasting some particularly heat waves, for example, we'll activate it in advance as well. Now, it has been on reserve outage mode since the 1st of October, and we actually had it running through October to allow a lot of critical maintenance to occur on the generation fleet in the SWIS prior to Christmas. If we actually didn't activate it, we would have had either not been able to allow critical maintenance of a number of facilities, which means we would have been short for summer, or we would have granted outages and we would have probably had a couple of LR2 events, because there was actually some very hot periods right at the end of October that had to be managed. So there's plenty more information about that if you would like it, just reach out. Okay, supplementary capacity tender. So those who are aware, this year's WA Statement of Opportunities, Electricity Statement of Opportunities, we identified a shortfall of 124 megawatts against the target. And we actually went out for 285, and that was to cater for effectively MUJA 6 being in reserve operating mode. Now, unfortunately, I can't quite announce how much we got under that process. We had a strong response in relation to the tender, which is really good to see. And as soon as we have finished those contract negotiations, we'll inform the market exactly what we have managed to procure for that component. And we're aiming to actually have that out or finalised by the 1st of December. In terms of gas, as people are aware, the provision of gas is very important for a large proportion of the generation fleet in the SWIS. We're not expecting any issues over the hot season. There are a couple of planned outages by a few of the plants, but they're not going to impact supply in any manner. In terms of storage, we do actually have quite sufficient storage, and for some reason the graph on the right isn't showing up, which is a bit unfortunate, but you'll have to take my word on it. There's actually sufficient gas currently in storage at the moment. It's not quite at historic highs, but it's certainly in the middle. And if there was a major disruption to the pipeline, for example, based on current consumption of gas, we'd have enough gas for about 2.5 months to service. So that is a really good position going into summer. Now, in terms of getting ready for summer, that not only includes making sure there's sufficient generation and the network is in top condition, there's a whole range of activities that we undertake going into the summer period. So we've talked a lot about generation availability and fuel. We've been working very closely with both market participants and Western Power over this experience. We've taken a lot of learnings recently from the new market, and also making sure our power system operators are fully versed in all the contingency events that may occur. And we also have a number of communication plans. So in a bit more detail, more to add flavour, we've done a lot of intensive training with our operators, and particularly related to the outcomes of the North Country report. There's been a review of the interventions framework that the controllers are up to speed as well as how we actually issue constraints and the management of the much larger battery fleet that we have access to now. One of the learnings that came out of the last summer heatwave was associated with transparency about when we actually issue interventions and why, and how those interventions work under a lack of reserve conditions. So we spent quite a lot of time liaisoning with the industry on this, and really working in their feedback that would actually help people to manage the generation fleet and also their consumption in a much more proactive way, rather than having to sort of respond to when we issue out market advisories. So this has been quite heavily socialised, and so I won't go down into a lot of details, but effectively it's this, if we identify potential lack of reserve event, these are the actions that we take out to before the forecast event. So there's what we call this like stage 1, 2, 3 and 4, and there's some information associated there's some details of the information that we provide out to the market to allow sufficient time for the market to respond if needed. Now, be aware, if we don't get a market response after issuing the advisories, we certainly would direct on using constraints. If there's an issue that's actually not binding and generators are unable to come on, we can bypass those systems, and we can either use our energy management system directly to control the generators, or we'll actually call the site just to ensure that we have enough generation online in case of those events. So I hope that doesn't eventuate, but it's certainly there in case we need to use it. In terms of communication, we're being much more proactive in the way we communicate to the market. That's one of the reasons why we're having this session today. Now, for most of the people aware, is the coordinator of energy, who is one of the key components in any sort of event that may happen in WA. And there's very regular meetings with Jai Thomas, who's the coordinator of energy at the moment. During summer, we certainly have weekly meetings with Jai, and we'll also engage key stakeholders in the industry if required. And they'll be through platforms like this, and if needed, we can actually have an on-site or in-person meeting if that's warranted. So those communication protocols are in place. I won't go into a great deal on this detail. This one I want to leave enough time for Q&A, but there are certainly still risks that we have to manage over the summer period, even though we've done a lot of pre-work. So we're going to continue to, as we ought to, monitor generation across all the different parts of the power system to make sure they're operating correctly. Continue to work to make sure contingency plans are updated and refreshed if needed. A question that does get asked is how do we handle or how do we monitor, say, a degradation in high temperature? So we do have those limits. In the control room, we do monitor wind speed because there is the chance that wind generation will cut off if it gets too hot or if it gets too windy effectively. So we do have systems to watch and work out when that may happen. The other aspects I think we've pretty much covered in the other bits of the discussion or the presentation this afternoon. In terms of credentials, this is effectively the security we hold in the market. We monitor this very closely. All market participants now have access to that through the WMD application or the WMD QE application that market participants have access to, and they can monitor the position real time. That's actually been really effective. That was something that was quite a bonus coming in through the new market, and market participants by and large are very effective at managing their position at the moment. So we're quite comfortable going into something in relation to that. This is just a little bit of analysis, I guess. Well, it is a bit of analysis to determine where security is held. So overall, EMO does hold a lot of security across all our different markets that we operate. And for the WEM, we hold just a tad over $110 million of security. These are backed up effectively by international banks or the big four in Australia or treasury bonds. So they're very, they're very tangible security that we hold in the market. So that's the end of the formal bit of the presentation. Look, I don't see any hands or any questions in the QA, but I'm more than happy to take questions. People can jump in, or if you want to query, or if you'd like any more details, more than happy to see if I can pull it out. I have a few of my managers online, and they can also jump in to help me if I can't answer any question off the bat. So over to the group.
Martin, just while people are starting to think of questions, I do see there is one question in the Q&A from Jenny around the wind actuals.
So I think that was at the beginning of the presentation. So Jenny, if that was related to the January event, there was no constraint on wind generation on that day. It was effectively the difference between forecasts and actuals was associated with the change in wind resource over that period. If it's not, then just shoot me an email afterwards and I'll follow up with you. Okay, I can't see anybody else jumping in. I'm not sure if there's any Dorothy Dixes from yourself, Nicola. I know we got one question. Lloyd, do you want to just come off mute and ask your question? Or do I have to take you off mute? Hold on 1 second. Maybe it's me. Christina, can you help me out here? Is there any way?
No, I can do it myself. We're good.
Oh, you can do it yourself? Okay, I wasn't sure whether I was blocking you by mistake.
I was pushing the wrong button.
Okay, no problems.
Is there any mechanism other than the website for letting large users know when there are high-use events, LOR events happening? Is there any mechanism for letting people who are not actually participating in SR, etc.?
Yeah, okay. So we do try to publish as much as we can through the website. What I suggest is that you contact your retailer, and they should have access to all this information, and it should be possible for them to be able to provide it to you. Or
And the follow-up to that is, if I choose not to use a retailer in future, will there be a mechanism?
Okay. If you don't want to, well, that's sort of interesting, isn't it? Because your sort of options would be associated with going direct in the market, and then you would have access through there. So I'm not sure if Michael, if you wanted to jump in on that one, but while you retain being a consumer, you'll should be able to have access through a retailer.
Yeah, so the way that we would communicate, if you're talking about tight load day, I guess, Lloyd, right?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah. We do have a public data website. I'll just post the link into the chat where it's typically going to be. I'll put it in the Q&A to access the chat. Yeah, so it's going to be heat wave day. So that's when you want to check our public website for market advisories if you're not on the list already, and they should contain the list. You'll be able to download a CSV with the latest, but any heat wave days, they would be the days where you want to check what AMO has released to the market. This is all public information, so you can have at it pretty much. You have to squeeze it that around about midday to 4 p.m. on a hot day, and they'll give you an idea if you don't have access to this information in any other format. What would you be? What sort of information are you after?
Well, ideally, an indication of when there is a likely event when DSM or similar would be called, because there is the opportunity for other actors who are not participating in DSM or supplementary reserve capacity to also lower their load during those days. Not every industrial load has that capacity, but approximately a quarter of the load that I manage can be brought down, and that's anywhere between 1 and 9 megawatts. That's not nothing.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's quite considerable, because that would also affect your IR/CR allocation. So
you would see, so you would see in the market advisory that we would mention DSM. I just did a quick search in the. If you go to the link that I put into the Q&A section there, the data.wa.com.au hashtag market advisory. That downloads a CSV where you can look at the latest market advisories in there. See how far it goes back. We would say that AMO is going to activate DSM, and there's no LO2 condition that exists between X and Y time on the specific date.
yeah. So how about this, Lloyd? What we can do, if you shoot us an email, I'll get somebody to give you a call after, and they can just walk you through exactly where it is on the website and what we actually can provide as a default through that aspect, if you like.
Yep, that works.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Cool. Any other questions from the floor? I do see about 100 people connected. Otherwise, I'll close off the meeting.
There's just one more question, Martin, in the Q&A.
Oh, yes. Okay.
From Andrea Trindle. It says there is a high variance between KGP's forecast and actual production, the TJ day amount. Does this cause any issues?
Okay. I'll need to go and have a look at that one. Exactly the time period that you're looking at. Generally speaking, this is through information you're seeing through the gas bulletin board. Is that correct?
Martin, I see Hamish has got his hand up. I'm not sure.
Oh, he has. Oh, there we go. You can jump in for me. There you go.
He might want to be jumping in.
Yeah, I didn't see that one. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. So the Karratha gas plant, I guess the information that was presented was the capacity and the medium-term capacities. So obviously the capacity of a facility in the future is not necessarily indicative of actual flows. So, for example, a facility might have capacity of 600, but might only have actual flows of 200 or whatever they're contracted for. So yes, we do note there is a variance between actual flows and the capacity. However, I guess for our purposes, we're aware of those limitations and we work around them. So hopefully that answered the question, but let me know if not.
Yep, I think so. That's all good. Thanks.
All right. Okay. Well, it looks like there's no more further questions. So, okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for attending this. If you have any questions post this session that you didn't want to ask in the public forum, or that you want to comes to mind afterwards, please reach out and contact us, and we'll see if we can answer it as quick as we can. Otherwise, thank you very much for your attendance into this session, and I wish you the best for the afternoon.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye.